Iraq's invasion of Kuwait on the 2nd of August 1990 is an event which brought the Western world's attention to the Persian Gulf, an event which resulted in the formation of a 35-country coalition force to liberate Kuwait. Britain would soon be following America into war with Iraq. Margaret Thatcher and then later Sir John Major authorised the sending of British armed troops to help liberate Kuwait. The American-led air attack would be called Operation Desert Storm. Operation Granby was the code name given to British operations in the theatre. On the 10th of August 1990, it was then decided that both Tornado F-3 interceptors and Tornado GR.1s, as well as a squadron of Jaguar GR.1s, would all be going to the Gulf as part of Operation Granby. During the Cold War, Tornado GR.1's role was to quickly knock out airfields and other facilities if a Soviet invasion ever happened over Germany. Knocking out airfields would be carried out at low level, with the use of a special weapon. Before the Gulf War, we saw how much runway denial systems had come. In World War II, strafing an enemy's airfields would be common practice, carried out with simple bombs, rockets and guns. However, by the late 60s, the French had developed a dedicated weapon capable of effectively knocking out runways and aircraft.
The Durandal bomb is intended to crater enemy airfields to prevent their use. Propelled by a rocket, it bores through the concrete and explodes deep underneath, several seconds after impact.
Though the Durandal does seem to be a little impressive, what the Tornadoes were carrying was far more devastating and dangerous for the enemy. This weapon was the Low Altitude Airfield Attack System, or JP233. Originally designed to dispense HB-876 anti-personnel mines in the front section and SG-357 runway cratering bomblets in the rear. The bomblets were divided into two types, the first being high explosive charge to explode on the surface of the runway. The other half would be a deadly series of shaped charges designed to penetrate the concrete and then explode, creating craters. The HB-876 anti-personnel mines would make resurfacing and repairing the runway to operational capabilities incredibly difficult by making the runway a minefield. Alongside the JP233, the Tornadoes heading out to the Gulf would be carrying sidewinders for self-defense against enemy aircraft, Sky Shadow ECM pods, 2,250-litre fuel tanks, and alarm anti-radiation missiles. These were an excellent way of defeating enemy SAM sites and radar installations, which would launch surface-to-air missiles at Allied aircraft. The alarm missiles were of British origin, where 121 were used in the Gulf War, being the RAF's main anti-radiation missile. Though in the conflict, 7 Tornadoes were eventually lost. However, most of these were in the first weeks of the war during daring low-level night attacks over Iraqi airfields. In this video, I will roughly go over the Tornadoes' role in the Gulf, from runway busting to laser-accurate bombing. On the 23rd of August 1990, the decision was made that RAF Tornado GR.1s would be deployed to the Persian Gulf. Most of these initial aircraft would be coming from RAF bases in Germany, such as Lofting and Bruggen, as these were fitted with the more powerful RB199 Mark 103 engines. The GR.1s would also be using the cutting edge of technologies. Firstly, it utilised more modern electronic warfare suites such as the Sky Shadow Jammer Pod and the BOZ-107 Chaff Pods, and a sophisticated Marconi-built RHWR to warn the aircraft of any radar-guided locks on the aircraft. The time that the war was kicking off was inconvenient for the RAF logistically, as it was the time of the summer leave period, where the availability of combat-ready crews were scattered across squadrons. Number 14 Squadron was made the lead unit, along with several other squadrons, eventually including the infamous Number 617 Squadron, or the Dam Busters. Upon receiving the notice on being deployed to the Gulf, the crews from RAF Germany were completely new to mid-air refuelling, which would later become a necessity in the long flying hours between Bahrain and Iraq. Rapid training commenced in order to get the crews to perform safe mid-air refuelling. 2 days after the announcement was made, the 12 initial crews, in 12 aircraft, headed out to the Gulf on the 27th of August from Bruggen, Germany, to Akrotiri in Cyprus. There they met up with 6 aircraft from RAF Marham. Upon arrival, no time was wasted, with the aircraft beginning training at ranges in Saudi Arabia and Oman. The JP233 Runway Denial system would become the main weapon used by the Tornadoes for the next few months, so training was a necessity so that the crews got properly used to hauling a fully loaded Tornado in a combat zone. The low-level delivery of the JP233 at night meant that pilots needed to keep an eye out for the ground. However, one of the Tornado GR.1's features as an interdictor allowed it to carry this task out automatically. This was thanks to its integrated TFR, or terrain following radar. This system almost always ensured that the aircraft would be flying at a constant altitude, such as 200 feet at around 500 knots, whilst keeping track of terrain, making sure the aircraft wouldn't hit it. The main tactic behind the JP233 was to bottle up the Iraqis. As the Iraqi airfields were vast, beyond the length that a full run of JP233 could cover, cutting the route from hangars or hardened aircraft shelters to the runway, which would bottle up the Iraqi aircraft so they couldn't take off. At least we didn't sell them Harriers, or we would have ended up in a right pickle. There would be 3 Tornado bases that the RAF would use to attack targets in Iraq. These were Bahrain, Muharraq, Saudi Arabia as Dhahran, and Tabuk in Saudi Arabia. On the 15th of January, 4 reconnaissance Tornado GR.1As were also brought in. Alarm missiles were completely new, with testing having to be done in theatre. The RAF set up 2 dedicated 4-ships, codenamed Alpha and Delta. These would provide SEAD, suppression of enemy air defences, for other tornadoes when needed. Saddam Hussein was given a deadline to stop his invasion and pull out of Kuwait. However, as the time grew closer and closer, no hints of him stopping could be seen. The tornado sorties increased. On a training sortie, a tornado had hit the ground, bellowing black smoke into the barren desert. Flight Lieutenant Duffy and Flight Lieutenant Dent were killed in a hard turn at low level. On the 17th of January at roughly 2 AM, the tornadoes from Iraq would target Tilil Air Base, which was at the south of the Euphrates. This airfield was massive, having 2 runways with parallel taxiways for 12,000 feet. They would be one of the main focuses that night, spearheading the coalition's war against Hussein. 8 tornadoes thundered down the runway at 2 AM, flying up, away from Bahrain and towards Iraq. They would refuel with a VC-10 before pressing on to the unknown. It would only take them 20 minutes of flying from the Saudi-Iraqi border to reach the airbase. These 8 tornadoes would be part of a much larger attack, where they would be supported by EF-111s and EA-6Bs for electronic warfare, F-4Gs for SEAD, AWACS giving positions of friendlies and enemies, and covered by F-15s. The tornadoes would attack in pairs, with 30-second intervals. Their whole air attack would be done in less than 5 minutes. Having refueled, the tornadoes descended to 200 feet, turning on the autopilot mode on the TFR and the Sky Shadow EW pods. Racing towards the target, the crews could see bursts of AAA shooting upwards, blindly into the sky. A US Navy operation on the base was already in action, waking up all the Iraqis, stirring up a hornet's nest. Crews could see the AAA spearing out of Tilil, however they didn't know it was Tilil as it was to their left, until their autopilot made a left turn, pointing the aircraft straight at the wall of the AAA. Autopilot was then turned off, and the pilots braced for the kickback when the JP233 was completely released, as the aircraft would shoot upwards with the loss of so much weight. At around 30 seconds away from their target, the aircraft maintained 480 knots. Outside the cockpit, the air was filled with the AAA being hosed aimlessly at the sky, hoping to hit a target. Strangely, inside the cockpit all was relatively quiet and warm, the pilots not being able to hear much of the outside noise.
There we go, it's going. 515 knots, keep running. There's the Calypso. Right, let's go left. 240, keep running, that's the airfield. No problem. We're up at 600, up Catholic. Nothing up there.
With the 60 cratering bombs and 400 minelets being fully dispensed, followed by 3 thuds as the JP233's canisters dropped off, the 8 tornadoes ran for the border. That night, all 3 RAF bases with tornadoes in the Persian Gulf launched attack on 3 Iraqi targets. Dhahran's wave consisted of a 4-ship heading out to Madayasis. This left at 2 AM, however the number 3 aircraft suffered an ECM failure, the Sky Shadow not wanting to work, so they had to return. The rest of the tornadoes refueling and heading towards the airbase. However, in the 1 o'clock position a radar warning came on the RHWR. It was a Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-29 Fulcrum. This aircraft, along with the Dassault Mirage F1, formed the backbone of the Iraqi Air Force during the war. Though cheap and dated by today's standards, the MiG-29 in this situation could have very easily intercepted the interdicting tornadoes. The AWACS hadn't picked up the Fulcrum, however it was still on the RHWR of the tornadoes. However, the ping disappeared. They headed further on to the targets and released the JP233s. However, the JP233's shaking was unexpected, sending one aircraft ballooning upwards. However, quickly he rejoined with the formation and headed back for the border. They refueled and landed back at Dhahran. Tabuk's wave against Al-Assad airbase was pretty much identical to the Dhahran, with 2 alarm tornadoes supporting the interdicting foreship, providing seed. On the way to their airfield, they saw a burning wreckage of an aircraft and eventually engaged an SA-8 battery. 3 alarms were fired and 2 immediately fell to the ground. An amazing first impression. Over the coming days, several attacks took place which rolled out in a very similar fashion, with all the aircraft returning safely, albeit with a few mechanical issues preventing a full foreship from going out. In the daytime, the maintenance crews would get a chance to service the aircraft, as the aircraft were prepared for night sorties. On the evening of the 17th of January at 7:30, a foreship was due to take off. However, only 3 of them took off due to one being unserviceable. The remaining trio met up with 2 victors before heading out to another airfield. Seed would be provided by EA-6Bs and F-18s. A different approach was going to be used this time, which was to loft 1,000-pound bombs into hardened air shelters. The attacks made by the 1st and 4th aircraft were successful. However, for the 2nd aircraft, this didn't exactly go to plan. During the start of their loft, their left engine was hit and started flaming. The crew's last message was, "We might have to get out." Their position noted down by an AWACS. Both John Peters and John Nicol ejected safely, however were put through being a prisoner of war. Both have shared their stories with an amazing book called Tornado Down. Over the coming days, several attacks took place which rolled out in a very similar fashion, with all the aircraft returning safely, albeit with a few mechanical issues preventing a full foreship from going out. On the 17th of January at 10 o'clock, Tabuk's wing launched a foreship attack with JP233 on Al-Assad airbase, with 4 other tornadoes covering for seed. They refueled with the other aircraft lights visible with the stars. However, when going sausage side, ECM on and lights off, things got serious. Iraqi conscripts along the road were holding torches, evenly spaced. If one of them heard an aircraft, they would light their torch, starting a chain reaction back to the air defences. An aircraft was seen doing circuits before coming to land. Meanwhile, the tornado had picked this up and tried to get a lock on it with an AIM-9L Sidewinder, to no avail. They then resorted to bombing it with the JP233, and 30 seconds away from the airfield the AAA lit up. However, the JP233 was quickly dropped over the base and all the tornadoes returned to their airfield safely. That same evening, Bahrain's wing lost their number 3 in an attack on Shaiba airfield, losing both Wing Commander Elson and Flight Lieutenant Collier. One of their other aircraft accidentally made a contact with a Stork on its attack run. The role of the Iraqi GR.1As would be to look for Scud sites and take photos of the damage that the JP233 hits had done. On the 19th of January, we lost another tornado, Waddington and RJ Stewart hit by a French-designed Roland Sam. We again lost another tornado due to its control column stiffening up, the crew being forced to eject. On the 21st of January, the Bahrain wing went up to medium level for the first time. 8 tornadoes with 8 1,000-pound bombs sent to attack an airfield in Jaliba. They were supported by F-14s and F-4Gs. The attack was effective, being out of range of the Iraqi surface-to-air missiles. Another was lost after its own bombs damaged the aircraft due to the airburst fuse. On the 22nd of January, it was one of the last low-level missions. However, the lead aircraft was shot down. Another aircraft was lost on the 24th to a surface-to-air missile at H3 airfield. On the 19th of February, a MiG-29 intercepted a Tornado GR.1A during a recce sortie. He fired an R-60 MK at the Tornado, and at the last moment he recalls seeing the Tornado's navigator turn his head back in fear, but it was too late, the missile hitting the Tornado and shooting it down. The crew couldn't eject. However, other sources state that this Tornado wasn't shot down by a Fulcrum on the 19th of January, but actually shot down on the 22nd by a surface-to-air missile. Which one do you think is more likely? Tell me in the comments. By the 25th of January, the RAF had moved its targets to power stations, ammo depots, communication systems and bridges. It was also found out that dropping 1,000-pound bombs from 20,000 feet would be blown off course by wind, so laser-designated bombs would be brought into the theatre. The only laser-designating aircraft in the RAF's inventory to be ready to be sent to war was the Buccaneer. I have a video on the role of the Buccaneer in the Gulf. Check that little card at the top of your screen, it should take you right to it. On the 3rd of February, Tornadoes flew with Buccaneers to Al Samarat Road Bridge, and they successfully bombed several targets. As a result of the Pave Spike laser designating requiring clear, daylight skies where needed to be operated in, and daylight operations became much more frequent. The GEC for anti-tile pod allowed the Tornado to designate without a Buccaneer for its own bombs as well as lays for other Tornadoes on the same mission. 2 tile pods were eventually sent out to the Gulf, which were all just prototypes which were rushed into service. Tiled also had a much greater advantage over Pave Spike. This was because it had an infrared sensor, allowing it to laze targets at night, which Pave Spike couldn't do. Due to the threat of SAMs diminishing to such a point where crews were no longer worried about them, as they would only be unguided, flying straight up, crews eventually got quite complacent, and a Tornado was eventually hit by a SAM whilst in an operating package consisting of 4 Tornadoes and 2 Buccaneers. From the 19th to the 27th, February bombings were affected due to the weather, however started to clear up, and on the evening of the 27th the last LGB was dropped by an RAF aircraft in Operation Granby. In the early hours of the 28th of February, just before another RAF tornado attack, Saddam yielded, ending the war. Trips for the majority of Tornadoes flying back to RAF Bruggen in Germany began. 6 GR1 stayed in the Gulf, and in May 1991, eventually leaving the theatre, thus bringing a close to the RAF tornado operations in the 1991 Gulf War. Thank you very much for watching this long-awaited video. If you'd like to support me, then please consider liking, subscribing and commenting. If you are interested, I have a small Discord server for all things military, link in the description. And with that, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.